Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Joining me, one of my favorite repeat guests is Dr. Kamran, who is the director of analytical development at the New Lines Institute and a good personal friend and friend of the show. So, Kamran, thanks so much for making some time to come on. I hadn't realized it had been roughly a year since we last talked to you, so hopefully we'll have you back on sooner rather than later. Listeners, we recorded this on Wednesday, December the 14th. I think this will come out on Monday. In the meantime, as I said on the Friday episode, we just passed 90 ratings and reviews. I'd love to get to 100 by the end of the year. So if you have not yet rated or reviewed the podcast, please, it only takes a couple seconds of your time and it would be hugely helpful for us. Otherwise, you can write to me at jacob@cognitive.investments if you have any thoughts about this podcast or want to hear more about what we're doing at CI. Otherwise, cheers and see you out there. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. All right, Kamran, thanks for coming on. We've got lots to catch up on. I can't believe you said it's been a year since we talked. I can't believe that. I feel like I talked to you last week, but let's, I've been wanting to talk to you for months now, really, because of what's going on in Iran. I saw on Twitter, you were basically saying this is the end of this regime in Iran. Maybe it takes 6 months or a year or 2 years for it to finally crumble, but you sounded extremely pessimistic about the future of the Islamic Republic. So tell me what you're thinking. It's Wednesday, December 14th. We'll probably publish this on Monday, so I don't think a whole lot's going to happen between now and then. But what do you sort of lay out for us the current situation in Iran from your perspective?
So going back to what I said on Twitter, basically I've been arguing for at least 4 years, if not more. In fact, I'd say when you and I were both at GPF, that's when I started to sort of think about this. And I think we published a few pieces on that. Basically, Iran has been going through what I call evolutionary regime change. And what that means is that there aren't any efforts to, or there aren't any pressures that are forcing Iran from the outside. When we think about regime change, we think about Iraq, we think about, Afghanistan, a war that, topples a government, tries to put a new government, none of that. Iran is sort of, falling on its face. The Islamic Republic of Iran is falling on its face. It's old, it's exhausted, it has nothing to offer. If you look at demographics, most people do not recall the era of the Shah. So they have no point of reference to say, hey, we're still better off than we were back then. What they see is a regime that's oppressive. What they see all around them, thanks to social media, is that the youth elsewhere are prospering. I mean, even heck in Saudi Arabia, under MBS, the youth have freedoms. They can go to parties. There's sports events, entertainment events. Albeit everything is new, yeah. I mean, but nonetheless, if you're an Iranian young person and you look at that and you say, what did I do to deserve all of this? And so there is no affinity. Then if you look at the leadership of that country is aging and almost dead. Most of the top clerics are gone. Rafsanjani passed away a few years ago. Khamenei is sort of sitting as the supreme leader. He's lonely up there without any of his old colleagues. And meanwhile, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards have taken up more and more space in terms of authority because they make things happen. At the end of the day, the clerics have relied on them as sort of their governing vehicle, if you will. They're in parliament. they're in the oil sector, they're in the broader economy. They are responsible for security. They're even towering over the regular armed forces, the Artesh. And this is something that's been going on. So the guards have been rising, and they feel, over time, they say, hey, we're doing the heavy lifting. Why is it that, the glory is for the clerics? So there's, it's not the old, same old days when, the fealty was there to the religious leadership. And yes, formally, you see that in info ops, and you see that in public pronouncements, and any footage, still or video that they produce, you'll see that. But the feeling of loyalty is not there. And this latest wave of protest after the horrendous killing of that girl Masa Amini was sort of waiting to happen. Something like this was waiting to happen. It's pent up frustration that's finding expression because of this incident and the outrage it generated. There is no solution. I mean, it's been going on for weeks and months now, and there doesn't seem to be any let up. If you look at the behavior of the regime, it tells you how geriatric it is. Because back in the day, I think you and I were at Stratford. I don't know if 2009 you were in Stratford at the time or not, but this regime dealt with the Green Movement very swiftly. But in sharp contrast, it's not able to. Statements are contradictory. You have top security officials saying, if we were given the order, we could suppress this thing, very quickly. But it's the patience of the leadership, and they don't want to go down that route. Why are you saying all of that? You're saying all of that because you don't have a solution. And there isn't. And then, of course, the economic situation is very bad. They thought, the Iranian regime thought, the nuclear deal, those tens of billions will start to roll in. But then the Trump administration came to power, and they nixed the nuclear deal. And that was bad for the regime. And I think there is a disequilibrium between Iran trying to play an oversized role in the region, in Middle East, and at the same time being able to balance their domestic political economic obligations. So I think that those are, in a nutshell, those are the reasons why I think this regime has no future. It has to evolve. If it evolves, even if slowly, it's not the same. If there's a bigger conundrum, and there's more chaos, and there's infighting within the regime, then that still means that the regime that we have known as the Islamic Republic of Iran is no longer going to be there. And I'll stop here by saying that we're also on death watch for Khamenei. Khamenei is by at least 80, if not 83 years old, and he's not going to get any younger. And when he dies, this is his republic that he built. And anybody who is going to be a successor to him is going to turn out to be a puppet of the guards.
Well, that's really the sort of $1 million question right there. So you say evolutionary regime change. Are we evolving towards an IRGC-dominated sort of Egyptian-style military dictatorship, except it's the IRGC playing the role of the Egyptian military? Or are we evolving towards the young people rising in the streets and throwing off their headscarves, and Iran is going to be, a modern-day republic that reflects the young people who are so pissed off about their lot? Which way do you see it going there?
So I think it's going to be a bit of both. I think that someone, has to hold it together. The clerics can't hold it together. Then it's the guards. The guards, as I've mentioned, and everybody knows, they're all over this system. They're the ones holding this system together. But I don't think I have the confidence to say that they'll be able to hold it together for a variety of reasons. Number one is they are of course, they're the dominant security organ of the state. They are the state. But there's also a parallel military force called the Artesh, the regular Iranian armed forces. They have their own air force, their own navy, their own ground forces. And they are their numbers are far greater than that of the IRGC. So that parallel military structure has been held together through a joint chiefs of staff office that reports directly to Khamenei. Again, Khamenei has one of the problems of the Islamic Republic is that ever since he took office in '89, Khamenei has been tweaking the original system. And his approach has been that if there's a problem, he creates a new, if you will, institution, or moves the institutions around, puts them under different umbrellas, and it becomes bloated. So the original problem doesn't get really solved, but you bring in another bureaucracy, and that complicates and becomes, a labyrinth of institutions. And that's why I think that there is tremendous amount of inertia that's really uh, wearing down this regime. Its inability to do anything because there's just so many stakeholders. So let's say Khamenei goes. Um, yes, there will be a formal move to appoint a successor. He'll have to be elected by the Assembly of Experts. Um, the Constitution says that until that happens, there will be a council, leadership council that takes over. I believe it consists of a top cleric, the president, and I think the head of the judiciary. Uh, so, so this is sort of the formal process. If Iran didn't have all these problems that it has, that's what you would see happen. But in reality, whoever is going to take office is not going to have the same stature or authority or respect as Khamenei did. He gets to appoint every single major military leader, whether it's in the regular armed forces or the IRGC or the Basij, and he's been presiding over it. Now, if that person leaves, it's almost most people don't talk about it, but it's a very personalized approach to governance and managing the state. And so if that person is out of the picture, then the rest of the factions will scramble and jockey for power, and there's going to be a power tussle. The problem of the IRGC is that it's not the only military force, and if it imposes, like if it does a coup or a martial law, that's going to be unconstitutional. And right now, until now, there is this thing about the Islamic Republic that where they keep those who say the Islamic Republic, or sort of the supporters of the Islamic Republic and the regime itself, have been saying we are a constitutional republic. So if you violate the Constitution, then you have no legitimacy. You already don't have legitimacy because a lot of people don't buy into the Constitution or the Republic itself. And then whatever's left, if you impose order through the IRGC, then good luck. So I suspect what is going to happen is they're going to need to bring in people or partner with civilian actors who have some pull with the masses. Obviously, as I said, there are people who don't, basically give a damn about the Islamic Republic. They want this regime gone. But there are a lot of people who don't want to sort of jump out of sort of the frying pan into the fire, and they say, okay, what about the day after? What happens? Like, this regime is gone. Who's in control? Are different areas going to, secede, for a lack of a better term? Iran is a multi-ethnic country. You have a large Kurdish population, ethnic Azeri population, ethnic Balochi population, ethnically Arab population, and then not everybody. A little over half of the country can be described as ethnically Persian, although most people speak Persian is the lingua franca. But from an ethnicity point of view, there's so many forces that can tear this thing apart. So the question is, how does the IRGC and this civilian, partner of the IRGC, in the absence of sort of a clergy, how do they work together? How do they push the clerics back into the background? Because the clerics are what is driving the public ire and the anger. So how do they fix this without bringing the whole house down? That's their challenge.
Well, I'm going to push on you a little bit there, Kamran, because I don't see how. I asked you if we're evolving towards an IRGC dominated government or the civilians can overthrow the current regime, and you sort of said, well, we can have both, but then we spent a lot of time talking about the IRGC. So, is there? I guess the question that I want to ask, and this is probably wishful thinking, is the IRGC really devoted to the revolution? Do they really need like Iran to be a theocratic regime, or are they more pragmatic? I don't know how to, and maybe it's impossible to. I don't know how to measure the IRGC's conservativeness or its adherence to whatever version of Islam the clerics had in mind.
So that's a great question. The IRGC is not a monolith. The IRGC is made up of commanders who have, their centers of power. So there are IRGC people who are, run the entire, the secretariat that runs, or the command structure that runs all three services: naval, air, and ground forces. And then you have institutions like the Quds Force. You have institutions like the Basij. So and then each commander is a different person. And so some people are more ideological, some are less. But it is important to realize that the IRGC is not theocratic the way the culture, the clerics are. The IRGC can be described as more ideological, but that ideology varies. So I distinguish between sort of fealty to the idea of a theocracy and a general sort of Islamist outlook, and that varies from person to person. From what we can tell, is that a lot of the IRGC commanders are very pragmatic, and from what I've been hearing over the years is um, there is this sort of angst, if you will, amongst the IRGC leadership, which is that they would like to be able to not be so encumbered by sanctions, and that will give them the cash that they need to be able to hold the line and basically not lose all the gains they've made in places like Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and at the same time not have to worry so much about public anger at home. Because if you think about it, if this regime can make life a little better on the economic front for people, then that gives them a potential tool with which to manage the massive discontent among the public. Obviously, that's not going to be enough, and we're already hearing, stuff where they're going to look the other way, for a lack of a better term, when it comes to the hijab rule, and they have to have some form of reforms in order to keep the young people happy, who are no longer as committed as youth used to be, say 10, 20 years ago, because this is a different generation. So the bottom line here is that yes, they are pragmatic, but they understand that if they want to run this system, they can't do it alone. Obviously, they're the most powerful faction within the system, but alone they can't do it. They need their counterparts in the Artesh to play ball. They need to be able to make sure that they can keep the more ideological security militia called the Basij in check, because that force is full of far more zealous militiamen than is the IRGC. At the end of the day, the IRGC is a professional military organization and not just a militia. But the Basij is. So they have to, and the Basij is about 1 million strong. The IRGC was given control over it back in 2009. So they will need to do that. But they need a deal. And then the question is, why should anybody from the outside world, the United States in particular, be in any rush to conclude any form of an agreement that gives them sanctions respite and the money starts to flow in, and but they need it. And so this is the conundrum. How do you you know how do you remain the driver of the system while working with all these centers of power, if you will, or partners? And what does that do to the Islamic Republic? What will be the role of the clergy? I mean, that's the big question here. Are they going to go into the background? Because the only model we have so far is that of Saudi Arabia, where the current crown prince, soon to be king, essentially, got rid of the religious police, and he neutered them. And he's neutered not just the religious police, but also the religious establishment. I mean, it's amazing to see that. I mean, this is the birthplace of Wahhabism, Salafism, and that whole extremism that we have seen uh, over the last 100 years, at least, uh, that is no longer there. I mean, this is a new Saudi Arabia. But can the Iranians do this and hold it together? I have my doubts about it.
You think it's a new Saudi Arabia?
I think it's a new Saudi Arabia in the sense that there are three pillars of the Saudi state, historically speaking. It was religion, it was oil, and tribalism. And religion isn't playing a big role as it used to. I mean, the youth are not being hounded down by religious police. Civil society is far more relaxed, and there's a cultural shift here. Um, I mean, one of the things that the previous kings, and I would even include MBS's father, who's current king right now, in this lot, is they were always afraid to rock the boat with the extremists. I'm sorry, with the religious establishment, because they feared that that would bring their order down. What MBS has shown is that's not true. Look, I can do this and maintain the monarchy because the landscape, the demographic landscape of the country has changed. There are a lot of women who want a lot of freedom. Obviously, he's not going to give them the freedoms that they want. He's going to be selective about it. But and then there's the youth. The youth want freedom. He's really latched and leveraged that sentiment within society to his benefit, and he's in control. He's basically saying you have economic prosperity, now you have social freedoms, and in exchange, all I'm asking is, don't rebel. I mean, obviously, he's not saying that, but that's sort of the social contract, if you will. Don't worry about it. That's the new social contract in the kingdom. Does it satisfy everybody? No, but it satisfies enough of people where MBS doesn't seem to have any challenges. At least not the ones that we can discern.
Yeah, all MBS is saying is don't criticize me, or else I absolutely won't chop you up into lots of different pieces and mail your body parts to different parts of the kingdom. That is in no way what I'm going to do to you. If I've never done anything like this. That's probably what MBS is saying. But to stay on focus there, rather than me getting on a soapbox about Saudi Arabia, it sounds to me like you're describing more of a civil war scenario in Iran than evolutionary regime change. I mean, you've got all these militias and factions running around and different armed groups and people not satisfied. And also the future of the republic seems to be up for grabs. Like, as you point out, as soon as Khamenei kicks the bucket, I mean, there is no MBS waiting in the wings. That I can't think of a singular charismatic Iranian leader who can unite different factions and things like that. So why do you think we're headed towards evolutionary regime change and not just, full out civil war or revolution?
So, evolutionary regime change, as I mentioned earlier, was something that I had been toying for several years. I think that process has accelerated, at least in the last several months, and visibly accelerated. It may already have been given until these protests broke out. Everybody was saying, okay, Khamenei will soon be no more, and then we're going to see change of some kind. That process got accelerated. So yes, absolutely. We could also look at civil war, but But the civil war is going to be complicated. So it's not going to be like Syria, because Syria broke up into different militias controlling different areas, and it's a minority sectarian government, and it had a different flavor and dynamic to it. In Iran, um, you don't while you have large populations who are of different ethnicity, um, there isn't they are not armed. That's probably one of the advantages that the Islamic Republic has, is that it really has a monopoly over violence. If we take the Islamic Republic as a whole, now, as you rightfully said a short while ago, there are different factions within the security forces that can go different ways. So this can get really ugly really quickly. But it's one of those things that I'm having a hard time sort of forecasting in a concrete way. Can't call it a civil war. It's no longer evolutionary regime change. It is regime, evolution or dissolution. Uh, but there are just so many centers of power, even within the regime. Society is divided. I think the only thing that's sort of that you can see across the country right now is the one desire to see this regime go. I think that's the common denominator. But beyond that, what does the regime look like? A future regime look like? What kind of system should there be in the country? I think beyond some basic ideas, we can expect that there should be a lot of disagreement among different people, depending on where they are. So if you're Balochi, and not only are you ethnically different, you are Sunni. You're not even Shia. So what does that mean for them? What would they want in a new regime? Are they capable? I mean, we know from Balochistan has seen a low intensity insurgency over the years, with different groups attacking the regime. Although the regime gained an upper hand in the last 5 or 6 years, and was able to basically quash that force, but the sentiments are still there. I mean, the top cleric in Balochistan has been openly criticizing Khamenei, and so this is not the same Iran that we were used to, say, 6 months to a year ago.
Yeah. Last question on Iran. Accepting that you just said it's really hard to forecast in the future, but do you think in your lifetime that you and I will meet in the streets of Tehran and enjoy a glass of wine?
I'm very pessimistic about that, because right now that can't happen because there's a regime. In the future, in the foreseeable future, will not happen because there will be uncertainty. The conditions will not be as such where tourists can go. I'm hoping it doesn't go the way of Syria. There's nothing that says right now that it will go the way of Syria, but there's just so much uncertainty, and you've had a regime in place for over 40 years, and if it's losing its writ over its territory, then will it be safe for people like you and me to go there as tourists and enjoy our time and sit in a cafe and sip wine or coffee or whatever it is that we want to do? I don't think so. I think that this place is unfortunately going to be a dangerous place for some time to come.
Well, that's depressing. Before we move on to even more depressing topics, what do you make of the future of Syria in the short term? Specifically, I mean, the Assad regime can't really depend on Russia for much longer. Iran seems to be having problems. Should we also be putting sort of a death watch on the Assad regime here, or do you think that they're strong enough that they can stand on their own 2 feet now without the Iranians and without the Russians?
That's another great question, and it's something that I've recently written up about, not in so much detail, but basically, look, the Assad regime has been is still afloat because it was able to defeat all its opponents with the help of Russia and Iran. Now that Russia and Iran have their own problems, the question is how much time and bandwidth do they have for Syria? Um, and the Syrian regime may have defeated its opponents in the civil war, but that doesn't mean it controls the country. I mean, we've been writing at New Lines extensively on what the Assad regime looks like if you look under the hood, and it's a pretty depressing picture. Whether you want to look at it from an economic point of view, whether you want to look at it from a security point of view, or just order in general. We saw some protests break out in the south, in Sueda, recently. And the Assad regime doesn't control a whole lot of the country. The places that ISIS controlled are now under the hands of the SDF, the Kurdish-led military force that's backed by the United States, and makes Turkey very angry. And the Turks are trying to push in. I suspect that, if I were to sort of forecast, I think that I'm only willing to go as far as saying that if Iran and Russia can no longer shape Syria, then that opens up possibilities for the Turks. Not that they will be able to do it. They have their own political, economic problems. They have an election coming up. Their economy is not doing well. And we just have to see, there's evolution there as well in the making. What happens to Erdogan? Will he win the election in next year in June? And if he does, can he rule the same way? What happens? So there's a lot of questions on Turkey. But as far as Syria is concerned, from an objective sort of military point of view, if Iran and Russia can no longer hold it together, then I think that opens up possibilities for the Turks to try and shape Syria. But I think it's going to be in slow motion. I think that the continuing decay of Syria will be with us for some time to come.
Well, I was going to move us to Pakistan, but maybe let's do Turkey now while we're at it, and then we can head to Pakistan in a moment. The big news today was that Istanbul mayor apparently is going to prison for 2 years for insulting the election commission or something like that. It still has to go to an appeals court, but if Turkey's going to start throwing in all the opposition politicians in jail, all of whom seem to be polling better than Erdogan in the elections coming up this summer, it's not much of a democracy we're looking at there. So where are you at with Turkey? Do you think Erdogan has a leg to stand on in elections coming up? Do you think it's even possible for him to lose an election?
So if, we played by the rules, it is possible for him to lose the election. Look, I mean, the AKP lost the mayoralty of Istanbul. This was the core support base. This is the former job of Erdogan. He was the mayor of Istanbul, and he rose from there. So for them, while Erdogan was, head of state, the president of the country, to lose the mayoralty, the municipality of Istanbul to an opponent, that was huge. So yes, if you play by the rules, if there's enough people who don't vote, who vote against Erdogan and his AKP, it is possible to lose. It's very obvious that Erdogan is, and from this arrest and this, ban on having, a role in politics for 2 years and some months for the mayor of Istanbul, Mr. Imamoglu, shows that Erdogan doesn't seem confident that he can win that election. So he's doing all these antics to try to knock out as much of, the opposition. Obviously, the goal here is to, not have a very popular opponent, and then that upsets the public sentiment. I mean, it's not easy if you eliminate a popular opponent from the race, then maybe the opposition can cobble up somebody else. But at least the government can take comfort from the fact that he may not enjoy, or she may not enjoy, the same popularity, and that helps Erdogan. So clearly, Erdogan is afraid, and he does not think that he is not confident that this is going to be like previous elections where he was going to win hands down. So you do these kind of things when you're not confident, and that says a lot. And at a higher level, Erdogan has been Turkey, and Turkey has been Erdogan for a long time. This is 20 years now, and so what does Turkey look like on post Erdogan? Are we there yet? I don't know, but the Turkish Republic is going to celebrate 100 years of existence next year, and which is something that Erdogan is hoping to sort of preside over as president, a re-elected president. But even if he's re-elected, I don't think that. I think his best days are behind him, and he's going to face a lot of headwinds, and which is why you see him playing all these different things and mediating between the Ukrainians and the Russians, trying to push into Syria because they help with polling numbers, energizes his base. Today he was in Turkmenistan, speaking about something that is also near and dear to many Turks, which is this pan-Turkic world that they're trying to create, and more importantly, turning Turkey into an energy hub if you have access to Trans-Caspian natural gas, including Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and perhaps even Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But that's why you see him doing all these things, because domestically he doesn't have much to offer, and this is his play, if you will.
Well, but that's not going to work. I mean, he came to power on top of incredibly high inflation from whoever he replaced. And if all he has to offer is pan-Turkic unity, plus some wheeling and dealing between Russia and Ukraine, I mean that's not going to fix 80% inflation in Turkey. So, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that he is scared about losing his position, and that he will hold on to his position at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, the question is that how far can he bend the system in his favor, and when does he face pushback? Because again, this isn't. Yes, Erdogan has been the man at the helm of affairs, but the country does have a judiciary. There is a military. I mean, it's hard to believe that he's subordinated pretty much every institution in the country. And it's a banana republic. I have a hard time believing that. So, in other words, there are limits to what he can do in terms of, playing around with the system and engaging in, unconstitutional moves. So, the question is he going to push too hard, and that will lead to a backlash, or will he get away with it for another long or short while?
Well, those limits don't seem to include arresting your top potential challenger in a presidential election in 6 months' time and saying he's not allowed to run.
Yeah, I mean, that's the stuff that I'm saying is that he can get away with. But this is still fresh, and we'll see how, the opposition is able to mobilize public sentiment that's increasingly against him. We remain. I mean, I think that I'll be watching the elections, and what is the public reaction if Erdogan wins again? Because there is an expectation among a lot of people who are going to go out and cast their ballot that they want to see change, and if they don't, is that going to be the tipping point? It's hard to say, but that's something to watch for.
Yeah. Before we turn to Pakistan, just sort of a question based on what we've already said about Iran and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and young people versus tradition, and realizing also that the Muslim world is not a monolith. But do you think the Muslim world is moving away from traditionalism? I mean, you talked a lot about young people wanting to enjoy more rights or more freedoms or sort of more liberalism, but everywhere we look, we've got like conservative regimes or regimes that have to make deals with conservative elements within society. I mean, from Indonesia to Pakistan to even Turkey, like you sort of have these dynamics. But you've sort of been alluding throughout our conversation to, demographics changing and young people wanting access to things kind of going forward. Is there any kind of change happening? Is there a youth movement in the Muslim world that is challenging traditional power centers, or is hope springing eternal and naive in my heart?
No, I think there is a challenge. I think that what can be safely said is that I think the Islamism has lost its appeal. Um, we see this all across. Whether you want to see in the new Saudi society that we talked about, whether you see it in Iran on the streets with the protests, and if you look elsewhere, even in Turkey, there's it's sort of a fatigue with those ideas, with those with that ideology, and that identity, if you will, that's based on religion. And there is a shift happening, and it's not like those guys are completely gone. They're still that. So, and maybe this is a good point to sort of jump into Pakistan and to give you an example. So, if you look at Pakistan's youth, um, they are energized by Imran Khan's message, by Imran Khan's, if you will, manifesto, or his vision for the country.
What is that vision?
That vision is one of a corruption-free country. He's appealing to nationalism. He's appealing to sort of dignity, and where Pakistan does not have to, listen to everything and accept everything that, let's say, the United States says, which is why he engages and he leverages anti-Americanism in that country. So yes, there's a little bit of religiosity there, but it's not Islamist. Religion is no longer sort of, I think, the ideology that it once was. When Islamism was seen. When you had Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, when you had a whole bunch of extremist groups in Pakistan, you still have them. You still have, because, and a lot of it has to do with mass illiteracy in the country. A lot of it has to do with unemployment and whatnot, and how Islamists continue to kind of leverage that. But I think what Imran Khan has done is basically take those sensibilities that and really basically leverage it for his own purposes, which is to say, so he will say, well, I'm not for fanaticism. In fact, fanatics want to kill me. And I'm not, Taliban Khan. He will argue that. That's sort of one of those monikers that was attached to him because he spoke out as an apologist of the Taliban, both on the Pakistani side of the border and on the other side. But you see, he's not. There's also sort of that, if you will, pseudo-liberalism, if you want to call it that, that's running in throughout his rhetoric and his movement. People, the bulk of the people are middle-class, urban, educated, who support him, and very passionately. Not because they want religion; it's because they want to see Pakistan, not be this sorry country that's always looking out for, handouts from the IMF or from other countries to survive. And they think that traditional leadership, whether it's political or even religious or military, really is incapable of doing that. Now, this is how they feel. And I think that Imran Khan has successfully been able to garner support based on these ideas. So I think that you're seeing, the religion is still there. It's a bit different. You're seeing young people, their energy, their desire for a better life. A lot of it has to do with social media and the ability to just see what their counterparts are enjoying in other places. And then the question is, why can't we be like that? And I think that there's a youth bulge in these countries that we've talked about that politician like Imran Khan is trying to manipulate for political purposes.
Well, yeah, I don't know that makes me very optimistic. But tell me then what's going to happen in Pakistan? Because I mean, Imran Khan is, I don't know, he's got a loyal following, but he seems to have pissed off all of the establishment. He's got people taking shots at him literally in the street. Where do you think Pakistan is going? You said we want to get rid of corruption in Pakistan and move away from taking IMF handouts. Pretty sure it's just as corrupt as ever. They're taking new IMF handouts, and they can't even get anyone to sell them any LNG because the Europeans are buying it all up, and nobody thinks Pakistan's going to pay their bills. So I mean, how does this end for Pakistan? I can't think it ends well.
No, Pakistan is not going to come out of its problems. In fact, the problems are only going to grow because of the circumstances. Earlier, I was just talking about the aspiration of people who support people like Imran Khan, and how the youth look at it, and how they want a way out of this morass. But yeah, look, I mean, Pakistan has so many problems. I mean, you see amongst people who study Pakistan far more closely than I do, the use of the word polycrisis. That there are just so many crises in that country, whether it's still religious extremism in parts of the country, in a cross section of society, whether it's economic and financial failure. I mean, right now, roughly, the Pakistani reserves have about $6 billion left, and I mean, there's been the reserves have taken have plunged. I mean, in the form of a nosedive because of what's been going on for the past couple of years. And so there's that. And then there is the reality where the military brought Imran Khan to power and enabled his rise. And now that same military is having a hard time trying to control the political creature that they created themselves. Meanwhile, the usual suspects, the old political parties, they have nothing to offer that can excite, energize people. And you can see this in by-elections that have been taking place, and which Imran Khan's party has won, decisively. So you have a movement that's popular, that is fueling itself on all the things that can get you into power, but cannot help you when it comes to governance. And many of the same people who are now part of Imran Khan were part of previous governments as well, and they've changed parties and switched parties. I mean, back when Imran Khan was still in power, it was it was openly said that a lot of the cabinet members were in Musharraf's cabinet as well. So what's different? And then Pakistan has become too big, too bloated. It's not an easy place to govern. It's 220 plus million people, very few, if you will, resources, cash strapped, and that problem is becoming more and more acute. In the old days, and this isn't new for Pakistan. What is new is that the world just doesn't have the capacity to bail Pakistan out anymore. I mean, if you look at it historically, the United States would come in with large aid packages that would keep Pakistan going. We saw this through various military governments, whether it was Ayub Khan in the 1960s, Zia in the 80s, Musharraf in the 2000s. But now there isn't an America with an appetite that thinks that Pakistan is worth, another multi-billion-dollar aid package. And so if that's not happening, then who's going to come in? Well, the Chinese can offer some money. The Pakistanis have been going to their allies in the Gulf, the Saudis and the Emiratis, including the Qataris, but they aren't excited about helping Pakistan out as well. From the Saudi point of view, they've got Pakistan to worry about, and then they've got Egypt to worry about, and both of those problems require large amounts of cash, uh, and you know, and those are just sort of like two problems that the Saudis have to deal with. So where is the money going to come from? There's been talk about an IMF deal, but the IMF deal isn't coming because the IMF is looking at the Pakistani state and saying, well, you haven't fulfilled the criteria. So Pakistan is adrift, financially speaking. Meanwhile, the political crisis is there, and the military, which has been running the country, whether directly or from behind the scenes, no longer has the ability to run it alone. And this is very obvious from the way in which Imran Khan, when he was removed from office through a vote of no confidence that was, engineered by the military, or at least enabled by the military, you see the way in which he turned against, his own patron. And we've seen some unprecedented kind of criticism, rhetoric, uh, you know, very, if you will, tough language. Even foul language has been used publicly against military leaders. This is unprecedented in the history of Pakistan. It wasn't too long ago that if you spoke even, 1/10 of that way, that you would disappear. And now you've got tons and tons of people saying this, all across the country, particularly in the heartland, in Punjab, which has been the bastion of the military, and that's now sort of the place where Imran Khan is gaining more and more ground. And so, if the military cannot hold it together, you don't have the finances. You have Taliban on your western frontier. You have a right-wing Hindu nationalist government in India, and you're caught between a U.S.-China rivalry. You have the worst of all worlds, if you ask me. So it's it's looking really, really bleak for Pakistan. I'm not saying Pakistan is about to, collapse or anything like that, but there are some serious problems here that are going to get worse. And it's easy to see that the state may lose its writ over many areas if this trend line continues. If they cannot arrest this, if they cannot turn this around, if they cannot stop the hemorrhaging, then it's not beyond the pale to think that this place is spin out of control.
More uplifting stuff, Kamran. Before I let you get out of here and let us watch the second half of France Morocco, I think we'll leave Central Asia to another time. I think I want to have you back on and just do a whole hour just on Central Asia. But we've talked a lot. It's been a lot of doom and gloom so far. It's been a lot of
I'm
Iran
sorry to
down
be the bearer of bad news.
No, it's fine. You're the bearer of true news. But I wondered if is there anything optimistic, hopeful happening in the Islamic world from your perspective, or geopolitically in general? Like what's giving you hope these days?
So I know you want to talk about Central Asia, separately. But the Islamic world isn't just the Middle East and South Asia. There's Southeast Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia. We don't talk about those places, or most people don't.
Yeah, but if we talked about Indonesia, we'd be talking about a suicide bombing in Java last week, and new laws with social mores and traditionalism rearing its head, and the unholy alliance between Jokowi and the clerical establishment there. I mean, I don't see see that that's a positive bright line there.
No, I'm not saying in a sharp contrast that there's positive news. Positive is relative, but I think that if you look at and most people don't tend to look at these as Islamic countries because they have they have a Soviet legacy, and before that a Russian legacy, and even after that. So I think if you look at Central Asia, they're in an interesting place. Countries like Kazakhstan, countries like Uzbekistan, they're in an interesting place because they're coming out of a very closed state and society, and they're opening up. That opens them up to a lot of perils. But I think that there's something there with that you can sort of say this doesn't necessarily have to go down the wrong path. Uh, and there's enough there in terms of an economic engine in both countries, political leadership, stability, the willingness to change, even if it is piecemeal, incremental, slow. So I'm looking at that part of the world. If you want to talk about Muslim majority countries, and I think that they may surprise us. Though that said, the smaller three stands, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, I'm not so hopeful about them. And there are a lot of headwinds. If you're sandwiched between the Chinese and the Russians, and the Russians are declining as a power, and China is there but not there just yet. Then what happens to this landmass? What happens to these countries? How do they move forward in an era where they don't have to look over their shoulders and say, "Is Moscow still with us?" And they have to make it on their own. So I have mixed feelings. I mean, part of the region looks optimistic for me, but there are other areas that I am, less confident about, to say the least. And then, Afghanistan sits in the middle of the Middle East, South Asia, and Central Asia. So, we've seen 40 years of chaos emanate and radiate out of that country. So, let's just put it this way, that I think you and I and others will be talking about these places for the rest of our lives.
Well, I asked you for something optimistic, and I'm not quite sure that qualifies. But Kamran, we won't let another year go by without talking to you. I want to have you back on literally in the next 6 to 8 weeks and do a deep dive on all the stands. I also need to. One of the reasons I want to take a short break before we do it is because I have to get caught up on the latest in Turkmenistan and Gurbanguly's son and whatever crazy things he's doing, so that I can report back to the listeners about if we're having melon-shaped tea houses with percentages of the country's GDP to build them. It's that kind of country. But until then, take care. It's 1-0 France right now, so we'll see what happens by the time this publishes. Maybe Morocco will be the only silver lining in the whole story. So talk to you soon, Kamran.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur.